Okay, we might press the play button. Certainly for the listeners out there, thank you for joining us in regards to fleet safety, 5 steps to driver safety. Special guest we have today with us. Obviously, I'm first myself. My name is Joe Hoolahan, CEO and co-founder of JESI Journey Management Solutions. These webinars are initiatives that we try to do at least one a month and bring in key experts to speak around all things to do with whether it be driver safety, travel, corporate initiatives that are out there within safety. And today we're lucky enough to be joined by Russell White. Russell is widely regarded as one of Australia's leading road safety advocates with experience in the driver training industry spanning more than 25 years. He has been forefront of some of the most recent research into driver training, as well as the biomechanics and human factors that contribute to driver performance. Throughout his career, Russell has assisted thousands of people from all over the world to become safe and competent drivers by passing on his skills and knowledge on the art of technically better driving. Governments, both state and federal levels, have sought Russell's views on road safety issues. He has presented papers at hearings from Queensland's Safe Travel Committee, Transport and Regional Policy Committee, and for a number of federal Senate hearings in Canberra. Russell has also addressed international road safety conferences in Africa and Canada. He has designed and delivered various training and vehicle release programs for various vehicle manufacturers such as Kia, Holden, Isuzu, Subaru, Hyundai, and General Motors, as well as luxury brands including BMW and Mercedes-Benz. Russell is regarded as one of the nation's leading road safety media commentators and has appeared on a number of television programs, including A Current Affair, Today Tonight, 60 Minutes, Sunrise, The Project, and The Great Southeast. In addition to his work with Driver Safety Australia, Russell is also the founder and CEO of Australia Road Safety Foundation. The foundation runs the internationally recognised Fatality-Free Friday, which is, of course, is tomorrow. We'll talk a lot about today. The safety campaign, which hits the roads and is also at the forefront of the Australian Road Safety Awards. It's always great when your mum writes your bio for you, Russell. That's a fair rap, isn't it?
And I should just say, Joe, any of those TV shows, A Current Affair, 60 Minutes, Today Tonight, that's always been for the right reasons. There's been no door stoppers or that hard-edged journalism on that side. It's always been for the right reason.
Oh, well, we'll take your word for that one. So, look, it's great to have you. And Russell and I met a few years ago at a conference where Russell was the MC and the keynote speaker for, I guess, the key thing that I remember, Russell, was when all the holes in the cheese align and we can go through life knowing that things don't cause a knock-on effect, but the day those holes in the cheese align is the day we need to really take note. So it's great to have you here, certainly from the listeners and the people joining in. There will be a Q&A session at the end. Probably the format that Russell and I will follow is just a fairly relaxed fireside chat, if you like. And please make notes if you do have questions, and we'll go through some Q&A at the end. So firstly, Russell, obviously, occupational road safety is a massive issue for corporate organisations everywhere. What do you consider these days are the greatest risks that we are seeing?
Well, Joe, again, it's a really interesting subject, isn't it? I think, when you look at work-related road safety as a separate industry, and if you compare it to, I guess, the risks and the management tools that we use for managing other risks in a workplace, it's been my experience. I think, vehicle management and safety around work-related driving has probably been, I guess, one of the underachievers in a lot of ways. I know there's industries, mining and gas and oil have led the way in a lot of this stuff. And I think what I tend to see is when we talk to people outside that sector, I'm actually really shocked sometimes as to just how little preparation is done in the area of work-related road safety for fleets that can have hundreds, if not thousands, of vehicles actually on the road doing work every single day. And I think one of the things that does alarm me a lot is that in a large part of corporate Australia, there might be inklings of the level of exposure risk that people are facing with this, but so often road safety just seems to be swept under the carpet, or it's put in the too hard basket, or no one's got ownership. I think they're the sort of things that we need to try and tackle. We've got to try and make it that someone is responsible for it, that people and organisations do have policies and procedures in place. And of course, they've got the things to help manage that. That's including journey management and driver education and road safety campaigns that promote road safety awareness.
Whether the developing the policy within organisations, is it just become one of these obstacles that's just so great and too big?
Yeah, I think as I've travelled around the country and I talked to various fleets of various sizes, a few things strike me. One is that in some cases, some very large organisations, and I won't mention them by name, but I'm astounded that when you talk to them about the complexity of their fleet operation and that they've got people on the road, that they really sort of put into this case that somehow it's not their issue, whether the fleet's their own or it's a grey fleet or whatever. There seems to be no ownership internally. And then when you ask the question, well, have you got a fleet safety policy in place or have you got any training, you get often a blank look of fear on people's faces because they've got nothing really to kick off with. So, having a fleet safety policy, in my view, is the first place to start with all that. And even if you only start, at a basic level, at least get some action happening. The other thing I tend to find too is around other interventions that are quite easy to do. And again, whether that's in sort of induction training program or some sort of vehicle induction or some sort of process where there's regular discussions about road safety, those things don't seem to happen either. And so often I hear from potential people that we talk to is that when you follow them up, the response that you get is often that, we liked what we saw, but there's another. We're putting road safety off because another priority's come up, and that statement really shocks me because again, when you look at the stats from WorkCover and from WorkSafe, that nearly half the deaths and injuries that occur in a workplace are the result of a vehicle incident. I just can't see how you could put anything else over a priority of that, especially when things are simple to do and they're not very expensive to get a start on, right? And I suppose the reason why I think sometimes too people have this lack of ownership is I think for a long time work-related road safety sort of fell between the cracks between, if you went to a fleet manager, he'd say, oh no, that's an OH&S issue. You'd go talk to the OH&S manager, they'd say, oh no, that's a fleet issue. And because there was no ownership, nobody would sort of steer that ship. What I also found really interesting, though, is that, if you've been to, their corporate office and you walk through to their staff room, there'll be posters all around the kitchen about other safety risks, yet virtually nothing dealing with the risk that for many organisations is the greatest risk to their employees, no matter what their core business is. Driving's the biggest risk factor.
So, talking yesterday, Russell, about sometimes the case of deciding whether it's a policy or a procedure. How about we just actually, great to see companies just start somewhere. Not to get locked into a 40-page document, but actually start to have some really simple, basic behavioural type. This is how we deal with road safety and journeys and obviously using vehicles within our business.
Yeah, Joe, and I think the thing that's important with this too is that, as with all the sort of chain of responsibility, all the workplace legislation that's there, typically it's the case, if something happens, that's when panic will set in, because all of a sudden, there's inquiry going on, how did it happen? When did we know about it? What systems we got in place? And, always with these things, it's a countermeasure to manage obviously the safety of the people, but it's also a compliance issue. And I've often said to people, if something did go wrong, are you going to be happy, sitting in an inquiry or some sort of investigation and virtually saying, well, we didn't really have anything in place at all. We knew it was a problem, but we put another priority on it, or we thought it was too difficult, or, is a judge going to necessarily take that as a valid response? So, I think we're seeing more of that as from right around the world. There's more cases around work-related road safety and incidents that happen with that. And, I think it's only a matter of time before we start seeing those things, those sort of cases in Australia.
And we certainly heard that last month with our Grey Fleet webinar that we did with our partners, Strategic Analytics team in the UK, where they talked about the duty of care in that vehicle being a work tool, even if it's owned by the employee. As soon as they step into that vehicle as part of their work day, it's a work tool, and getting right down to has your employer inducted you how to use that piece of machinery is quite alarming, but it's the fact it's coming, isn't it?
Oh, look, absolutely. And I think, it starts to shine a light on, as I said, there's industries that have been at the forefront of this in this country, in terms of how they manage that. But it's been my experience that sector is very small. There's a lot of other organisations that simply have large numbers of fleet, on the road, people repping, people doing all sorts of tasks that require driving, and yet they have absolutely no policy. And what's even more alarming is that in some cases, if that person has an incident, they literally just have another set of keys given to them. There's no, and again, that's unheard of. If we were to look at that for any other piece of plant, if that was a forklift, if that was, any other piece of equipment, there's no way that would happen. But, I use the word sort of almost apathy in terms of road safety, that because, again, it's one of those things that, well, suddenly it's outside of our factory or it's outside of our workplace. To me, training and journey management, all that stuff becomes even more important, because the moment you leave the confines of a site or somewhere where you have an enormous amount of control, the only thing you can control on the road is what your own behaviour is. It's very difficult for you to influence other people. So it's even more important then that you've got things in place to sort of educate and help people manage that risk.
I think that's where the JESI world that we see, Russell, we've talked about this before, the ability to plan the journey is obviously the slide on the screen now, but to actually cognitively think about what the journey is going to take place and where you're going, the conditions, the type of vehicle, all those things come into it, rather than just the over automation of things. We just jump in and we go. So certainly that, I guess the point that I'm hearing from you is loud and clear it's not something we don't address. It has to be addressed front and centre, and there's got to be a something in place.
And Joe, I think there'll be industries and organisations which, they'll hear this for the first time, and typically, like any change, it's the sort of thing they'll go, oh, well, that's, we don't think we need that. But, if you look at the, let's say, had 25 reps on the road, and some of those, and I'm talking in a retail sense now, some of the people we've spoken to, a rep's route could be anything from, if we look locally, it could be Gold Coast up to Mackay, or it could be, central Sydney, out to Dubbo or Bathurst. It could be, virtually all of Victoria. And you keep going around picking states and territories. But some reps have enormous distances to travel, and so a lot of the time they're left to their own devices. So, really, if you've got fleet moving in any way, knowing that there's a journey management plan in place and you've got some means of responding if something was to go wrong, to me, I think it's an essential part.
We're just losing you there, Ross. I know something that is coming up a lot on our radar is the International Labour Organisation's agenda, really getting a lot of data around the commuting to work and how this is going to fit into our Australian context. And we all know that Australia's a big country and we cover a lot of distances. So I think that the message clearly is there that the data machines are going to start to actually, create data sets that actually will be able to very quickly identify, those doing the right thing and those that are probably close to the line. So just probably you're still there, Russell? I think
Yeah, I've still got you, Joe.
All right, great. No worries at all. Just moving on and talking about, we've talked about obviously the planning, the journey, and the organisation's obligation and compliance requirements. When it comes to the actual vehicle, again, looking at it's the piece of kit in our workplace that we so often take for granted.
Oh, look, absolutely, and in so many different ways. A simple thing, we sort of looked a lot at recent times just around tyres, and I always sort of choose tyres because to me they're the critical thing in terms of how a car will respond, especially in a situation where you need it to respond really well. And some of the work we've done with people like Michelin, they go through and do car park surveys, and they literally will find that around 80% of the tyres in a local shopping centre car park are either underinflated or they're damaged or they're illegal. And that'd be shocking if it was 20%, but when it's 80%, I think the tyres are the type of thing that people just don't often realise just how critical they are in terms of their safety feature, but also running costs and the whole bit. So, I think that the maintenance of vehicles is critical, and it places a real point of ownership with pool vehicles. If you've got an organisation where there's vehicles that are allocated on a pool basis, again, there's got to be some very clear things about, well, who's responsible for checking that the car is right, that it's in a condition that it hasn't got any faults, that the brake lights are working or the indicators are working. And I think what tends to happen sometimes is in the rush to just get the job done, people maybe don't consider that as a safety feature or as a safety requirement. So again, 2 weeks later, someone goes, oh yeah, that car did feel a bit funny in the steering, or it did seem to have the wobbles at 100 k's on the steering. So again, I think those sorts of things, those basic things around vehicle inspection, ownership, again, who's actually responsible for doing it, and then also giving the power to the people that are actually using it to have a mechanism to report when things aren't correct or aren't working properly. So yeah, to me, I think again, that's another point that, again, there needs to be some ownership and policies around.
It's a very the one of communication about, yes, it was wobbly at 100 k's, or come to think about, those brakes were a bit spongy, and even knowing that poorly maintained brake fluid will potentially lead to brake failure, and you won't get a warning about it. It's that maintenance issue. They're having the education to report the anecdotal things as well.
And Joe, I think on that subject, I mean, and I've said this before in the media, we're very spoiled by modern motor cars. Generally they'll start as long as there's fuel in the tank, but that reliability tends to also, I think in a lot of cases, has maybe made some people switch off about those basic things you just need to check, those simple things you can check just to make sure it's operating properly.
Yeah, very, very good point. So when we actually talk about ways that organisations can actually start to manage some of this risk and to do with travel or the vehicle themselves, are you seeing more organisations taking up, the concept of a travel risk assessment? It was probably unheard of a few years ago, but obviously now building that in with keeping on top of what fatigue means and some of the other risks. Are you seeing a greater example of that now?
Yeah, I think the level of awareness is building all the time. And again, I think I've often said, again, road safety in any form is a test of your endurance. It's about, shining the light on an issue and then just continually keep chipping away at it to, get people to, I guess, again, take a level of action on it. And again, in instances where that's been absent in the past, that can take a lot of time. But I do find now we do tend to get more inquiries about other services, other ways that people could start managing risk. And again, I think that's a healthy thing. It's at least people are starting to have the conversations and about trying to look at what things can be done. Because like I said at the start, I think sometimes this whole fleet safety thing can look like, Mount Everest off in the distance. So, how do you try and deal with it? Especially if you've got, a large number of vehicles, they're all over the country or even overseas. How do you start to pin that down? And I've often said, I think it comes back to, again, just having some simple things in place on the policy front. I think it's engaging in a couple of things, and whether that's, travel risk assessments, whether it's online driver risk assessments, online training, or some online tools that you can use to start to have this conversation. And I think the industry, the road safety or the fleet safety industry, has had to evolve to that too. And part of that is having systems that are easy to use and that people can, assess those things in a I guess, a sustainable and a way that gives them some confidence that they've actually, done something to manage that risk. So yeah, definitely, I think we're seeing more of that interest starting to come through. And again, like everything, though, I still think it needs that consistent effort to try and get it to be taken up by more of the mainstream. As I said, oil, gas, mining, I think those organisations have been across this for a long time. Local government, retail, even finance, those sorts of organisations have never had to cross this bridge yet, and I think that's going to be something they're going to have to change fairly quickly. I
think especially the changing of, I guess, the barometer in regards to, you know, a worker that drives and then has a long flight and then has another drive, and that whole of work journey. Now, if he's getting up or she's getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and not getting back until 6 o'clock at night, it's what sort of fatigue we're now starting to see. And certainly within the journey part of what JESI is doing is we're seeing that travel risk assessment being more and more asked for. And it's certainly something that there's that front of mind that certainly is coming through, which is a good thing, because that, you know, they're long days when we have people leaving early in the morning and driving to get to an airport and then flight and then a drive somewhere at the end of that. They're incredibly long hours, aren't they?
Oh, look, absolutely, and you know, you've touched on a really good point there. You know, when you put flight in there as well, there's, you know, can be different levels of fatigue around things like that, and people think, well, you're not working hard, you're just sitting on a plane, but you know, anyone who's travelled knows how tiring that can be, and you know, to have a plan that goes, well, okay, how are we going to deal with that? You know, that we're not expecting that person to jump straight in a car after they've had a long flight from the other side of the country or overseas. How you manage that is important. And again, I think it comes back to having a broader view about what fatigue actually means. I know when we talk to the general media, you know, we sort of promote the fact that, you know, fatigue's possibly not that 2 o'clock in the morning lone person on a country road. You know, fatigue can be, you know, at 3:15 on a Wednesday afternoon, just depending on that person's biomechanical rhythms and what they've been doing. So I think it's also part of our industry's responsibility to talk more about fatigue in a more holistic sense, not just that middle of the night isolated incident. It can happen anytime. Yeah,
I think one of the good points that I made a note of last time we spoke was the number of fatigue incidents that they're actually calling on the way to work. You know, for that early start that might be, again, leaving home for his normal day of work at 4 or 5 in the morning, and the degree of incidents we're starting to see of early morning traffic as well, rather than that late night fatigue one.
Yeah, it's interesting. We worked with an organisation where they actually did a detailed review of their crash stats, and when we helped them review that, you know, the thing that jumped out to me was why are you having major incidents in the morning when sort of the normal national trend, if you look at major crashes and fatality rates, there's a much greater peak between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. And this organisation had virtually the polar opposite. They were having much less in the afternoon and more in the morning. And, you know, we started to drill down, okay, well, why is that? Where's the start time? What are they doing? You know, what are the drivers doing in the lead up to this start of shift? So that's, again, where, you know, data is incredibly important. And again, it's that old saying about, you know, if you can't measure it, it's hard to manage it. And that's, again, the thing, when you have data like that, you can actually drill down and find out, you know, maybe something specific to your fleet. And I will say that's one other thing, Joe, that and all the time I've been doing this, every fleet's a bit different. You know, one-stop strategies are often, you know, pretty rare animals. You've got to try and have an approach that's pretty flexible and can work with an individual fleet's requirement, because they won't be the same, even from the same sector. They can have different requirements.
Yeah, very true. When we talk about the fifth and final step in the discussion today, Russell, we're talking about implementing a driver safety program, and obviously this is your bread and butter and where you've spent a lot of your time. How easy is it for organisations to implement a driver safety program, and, you know, how much time does it take from your experience, and what are maybe some of the success stories that you've seen come through in your experience?
Joe, I think in the past, if you'd said to somebody, we're going to do driver training or have a road driver safety program, the traditional line of thinking would have been, we're all going to head off to, you know, a circuit somewhere and do a drive day out there. And then the mentality was, once we've done that, boom, that's it, that's done. And usually it wasn't thought about again until 7 or 8 years later, if it was thought again at all. And again, it's like that old saying. It's like saying, well, I'll go to the gym once and that'll sort me out fitness-wise. Anyone who's trained knows that you can't just do it as an ad hoc once-off occasion. So anything for a road safety program, for me, you know, we invested a lot in online tools. I used to have fleets come to me and because I used to run a facility that stood alone like that, and we found with fleets it was just so difficult, you know, to get the budget to get people to do an intensive face-to-face program was often a limit. Trying to get people to travel from all over the country, fleets just couldn't afford that. They couldn't afford the downtime. So we started to find online training was becoming more of an aspect. And what's tended to happen is that we now lead with online risk assessment, online training. We then might go into classroom type of activities or seminars. We then might, for certain cases, we'll then go into face-to-face training on the road. And then some organisations, we still do the traditional driver training day. But I've tended to find now that you have to have a range of aspects. Now, I guess one of the success stories from that is that, we had an organisation that came to us and just employed the online tools. And it was a 3-unit course. Within a matter of weeks, they started to notice reductions in infringements, reductions in crashes. The fleet manager told me that he walked into the staff room and heard people talking about, steering technique. He said that never happens. You don't normally get that happening. So I think because we approach it from a biomechanics and like a sports science or a coaching standpoint, it creates it more in a coaching and conversational way rather than, I suppose, what people would maybe consider the normal type of driver training. So, for me, I think implementing something is really, really very easy. It doesn't take much to get some basic documentation down in terms of policy, and again, that can be done really easily. And it's also really easy, and that was one of the things I liked about online training, was that I could train people no matter where they are. I could still give them an induction of things I would normally be giving them anyway. And it allows us to train people. I could train thousands of people in less than a couple of hours. Basically with an email address and a login, you can train people no matter where they are. So it's actually much easier today, because I think, again, that was one of the roadblocks. People would look at driver training and just go, "Oh, it's all too hard," and therefore it just wouldn't happen. So it's about trying to create programs, and as I said before, every fleet's different. So you need to be able to customise and design something to suit a specific requirement.
Yeah, look, I think that's a great point. Being involved in organisations previously myself, where everyone loves a fun day out on the skid pan, and you do a few hard breakings and a few burnouts maybe and a few slides. But as you say, it's 7 years later. It's one of those nice to haves, not need to have. And certainly the tools you're mentioning about the online and being able to develop more with the resources and technology is a great thing. Obviously, the awareness that you guys and your organisations through Driver Safety and the Australian Road Foundation, Fatality Free Friday, what a great concept. Can you maybe in the last few moments give us a bit of an update on what Fatality Free Friday is all about? It's a bit of a tongue twister.
And occasionally people have said it's Fertility Free Friday, and that might have a slightly different meaning. Look, the whole idea of Fatality Free Friday was really to apply a Clean Up Australia Day or a Red Nose Day type of approach to road safety. And I'd wanted to do that for a long, long time. And when I started Driver Safety back in 2006, I attended a United Nations presentation about the global road safety issue. And one of the things that got me was what the presenter said, that 1.3 million people lose their lives on the world's roads each year. That really just sort of rocked me to my core. And I thought, as much as I love training people, I've also got to do more. I've got to try and reach a community to try and drive change with this, because we've seen great success in cultural change with health or with environmental issues. And, one of the things I've learned over this period, Joe, is that, in my view, I think a lot of people do want to do something about road safety, but they've never felt empowered to do it. I think often if you ask most people in the street who's responsible for road safety, they'll say, well, it's the government or it's the police. But I think until people realise that as a community, we're actually responsible for it. Those other, the other organisations are players in it, but ultimately it's the community that has to own it. So we really started Fatality Free Friday off in 2007 as part of the first ever Global Road Safety Week. And really that year it was just a media call to try and get some attention to road safety. And that first event really was just such a success that we had more and more people, say we need to keep pushing away with it. And now Fatality Free Friday is now in its 11th year. It's Australia's largest community-based road safety campaign. Last year we reached 15 million consumer impressions nationally. So from an event that was just a media call in year one, it really has blossomed into a real awareness piece. And a good example, just even today, on the freeways from Brisbane to the Gold Coast and to the north side, the overhead gantries have got Fatality Free Friday messaging on it. Turned on the radio, I heard 4 or 5 ads for Fatality Free Friday on the radio. So it's about trying to get the community to become aware of that. The keys to road safety are literally in our hands, and to trying to get one Fatality Free Friday is the goal. But ultimately, the view is if we can do it on one Friday, we should be able to do it every Friday, and then ultimately change culture 365 days a year.
So how do we get involved as individuals or companies? Obviously, it is tomorrow, so some of the bigger scale things may be something we need to put in our diary for next year. But how do we get involved and contribute to taking the pledge? I believe I've already done that online yesterday. Is that the main way?
Yeah, look, that's probably the easiest way, Joe. Again, given the time that's left, probably getting onto the Fatality Free Friday website and signing the pledge, or getting onto Facebook or Twitter. Our social media activities pretty intense these days, so you'll easily be able to find us there, and you can simply sign a pledge there. You can change your Facebook profile picture just to include our yellow ribbon twibbon that we've got for Fatality Free Friday. Or, of course, you can attend almost the close to 200 events that are happening, and those are listed on our website. Local community ones to major media calls that are happening around the country tomorrow. Even organisations or individuals are just having their own Fatality Free Friday morning and using it as a way to talk about work-related road safety or issues that they're facing. So it can be as big as small as you want, and certainly if people want to do more of that sort of more intense campaign, we could certainly, we'd be happy to chat for them for 2018.
Fantastic. It certainly is a great cause and a great awareness day, so I'd certainly encourage everybody to jump on board and be a part of Fatality Free Friday and pledge your support. Just obviously needing to wrap up there. We have gone a little bit over time, but I think some of the conversations have been certainly worth it. Happy to take some questions for a few quick minutes from anyone online. If you can you'll probably see a little chat bubble up on your screen. People should be able to just click on that and then enter away if you do have a question. I do have one that's come through. Russell, what sort of safety outcomes or cultural change do you see when we're taking the steps we just mentioned? I think we talked about the safety fellow going into the lunchroom and hearing people. It's part of daily conversation, those sort of things, I imagine.
Yeah, I think to me, Joe, that's one of the great wins. If we ever get that sort of feedback, I take that as a real personal positive achievement, because driving for a lot of people, I'm probably the opposite. I mean, I love cars, I love driving. It's been my career for most of my life, so I love it. But I can understand that some people, don't share that same passion. So when you have people that aren't necessarily automotive focused, starting to talk about that, to talk about, things that they, even simple things like, I realise now I should be looking further ahead down the road, or I've realised I should actually have a bit more margin between myself and the car in front. I should start to take the long walk around to the driver's door, so I actually get a chance to see what's behind the vehicle rather than just bowling to the driver's seat, putting the belt on and reversing out. To me, they're the cultural wins. And to a certain degree, we've had a similar thing with Fatality Free Friday. I've had feedback where people have said, that campaign has changed the way that I think. It's changed the way, I don't use a mobile phone now when they're driving. And when I get that feedback, I just think that's really terrific, because I think one of the problems that we've had in the past, and I mean, you touched on it briefly before, where, sometimes people have gone to a driver education day or a driver training day, and, for want of a better word, it was actually more of an entertainment day. The practical stuff or the things that they probably should have been learning, for day-to-day application, got confused with other stuff that was designed more to around give people a good time. And I've got, I understand there's a place for that, and, if that's the appropriate thing. But I think as an industry, driver education needs to move away from that it's all witches' hats and traffic cones and skid pans, and then it's more about human factors, biomechanics, things that you can use every single day on the road, that you don't need a special place to practice for.
Russell, just got one question from Ron. Thanks, Ron, for the question. Does your organisation target companies who are known to have several serious incidents or accidents, or especially fatalities, as one major oil and gas operator has done the last few months, rather than assume that they're all doing something about it? So, do you come in almost like reactively around people that maybe have that history?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, our view is, and I suppose that's why we've tried to do as many different things as possible to try and create an atmosphere where people can approach us and talk about issues. I mean, I wouldn't say I necessarily target organisations like that. I'm always happy to hear from them if they're ready for that point in their journey. I suppose like a lot of things, I've tended to find it's just been through other things we've done that people have approached us. I don't necessarily, I mean, there's sometimes where I might cold call an organisation. The difficulty I've had with that is finding who the right person is to talk to half the time. But yeah, I occasionally, while I might cold call, I don't necessarily target as such. We've generally found most people have found us, which is kind of the nice way to do it.
That's good. Well, look, I think certainly it's been a great chat, and certainly I know from my recent experience of being a father of an elk plater, that certainly a lot of the topics you raise ring true to me, but also, knowing that my staff are travelling and we're on the roads with a whole bunch of other road users is significant. So, look, I'd really like to thank you for your time, Russell. I think, congratulations on some of the initiatives that you are getting forward, and have a great day tomorrow with Fatality Free Friday. Fingers crossed, and let's all do the best we can to make sure we get that zero goal. To those that have joined in, really appreciate your time, and we will have this webinar up on our JESI.io website tomorrow for those that may want to recap some things. I would certainly encourage anyone that wants to reach out to Russell to give him an email. Just confirming that email there, Russell, is just russell@driversafety.com.au for yourself.
Yeah, that's correct, Joe. I'm happy for people to reach out directly. More than happy to chat.
And certainly from our point of view at JESI, if you'd like to look at having a bit more of a discussion or asking a few questions, or if you do want to explore something further, or even if you think you may have a topic for future webinars, we'd love to hear those as well. But once again, Russell, really appreciate your time. Have a great day tomorrow, and wish you all the best for it. It's been a great chat.
Thanks, Joe, and I appreciate the support, mate. And again, to everyone that's been online, I really appreciate that support. And Fatality Free Friday is such an important day, so we've done as much as we can all month. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for Fatality Free Friday tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Joe.
Take care.